Thanks everybody for coming out, and we have Nicole Ricci here, who's an IEP alum and almost 2 decades in federal fisheries management, especially high seas management, both from the science and policy side, and so really a wealth of knowledge. And you're going to kind of tell us, I think we had it in the listing, the good, the bad, and the ugly of fisheries management. And now Nicole is started her own consulting group, and so it's this RDM Fish here as her consulting group, and has a few clients that maybe she'll tell us about. And so this might be another kind of path to think about, is kind of more the, not just the government, but the consulting route. So really looking forward to her talk here. Glad she could join us. Let's give her a warm welcome.
So the interpretation, folks, can you hear me on the microphone?
Bang the window.
Okay, good. So, thank you for the introduction, Jason. I'm Nicole Ricci, and I do have an independent consulting business called RDM Marine Fisheries Experts. And so what I was going to do is give a really broad overview of international fisheries management. I don't know if you guys are very familiar with international fisheries management or conservation and science management on the high seas, but I was going to give a real broad talk about that as best I could in the amount of time, and then talk a little bit about my career, and then open it up for questions for you guys, because I think your questions are probably the most important thing for you guys. So if you want to have a good understanding of international fisheries management, it starts with understanding maritime zones and the jurisdiction of the different zones. So just bear with me as I give you a really quick run through of those. So in order to delineate the zones, they start with what is known as the baseline, which occurs on the shore, and the calculations for the baseline are actually in the UN law of the sea on how to calculate those baselines, and it's different for different states. It's different for different states in the U.S., and basically it's the mean of the low tide. And the calculations are done every so often, again, because of natural coastal erosion and accretion. The baselines actually shift on their own. And so the first thing are the internal waters, which are your rivers and your bays and your lakes, even your lakes that connect to the seas, like the Great Lakes. Coastal state has sovereign right over all of those waters. And when I say a coastal state in the international community, I'm not talking about the states along the U.S. that are coastal, but the countries are referred to as states. Okay, perfect. Getting nods. And then, so from the baseline out to 12 nautical miles is the territorial sea. It's basically considered part of our territory. So we have full jurisdiction of the seabed, the subsoil, the water column, and the airspace above that as if it was our own land. It used to be 3 nautical miles, which was the distance of a cannon shot, which most people know, because that was what they figured the best they could defend themselves as far as a cannon shot could go. But then it was extended to 12 nautical miles by Reagan in the 80s when they were negotiating law of the sea. And many of you might know law of the sea is the biggest piece of legislation other than the freedom of the seas, the navigation. But we're not a member, we're one of the people that are not a party to law of the sea. You also might know that. Of those that are members to the UN, otherwise it's Libya, Iran, and North Korea. I think we're not party to this. So good company for us in that decision. So then the next out is the contiguous zone, which is from the baseline to 24 nautical miles out, and that was extended from 12 nautical miles to 24 under Clinton in 1999. And basically, the coastal state again has sovereign right of those different areas, the subsoil, the surface, the seabed, and the sub-adjacent waters, which is the water column, and they can create particular rules. They can't stop transit of passage in any of these areas, but they can create rules like immigration rules, discharge rules that states have to be bound by, and then they can penalize vessels in that area if they're not following the regulations that the coastal state has put in place. But the one that is most important for our discussion is the exclusive economic zone, which is from the baseline to 200 nautical miles out, and it includes the airspace above it, the seabed, the subsoil, and then adjacent the water column. And it was created in 1983 by U.S. proclamation. It was something that we did agree to under law of the sea, if not the entire thing. And the exclusive economic zone of 200 nautical miles out from the US is really significant in terms of economics, because it's not only the water column, but we have exclusive rights for exploration, research, exploitation of that and the continental shelf, including energy exploration, so currents, waves, winds, we can use all of those, are all ours. And the continental shelf will extend from the country out either the 200 nautical miles or to the natural extent of the country's continental shelf. And then, if your continental shelf actually extends beyond 200 nautical miles, you can put in a claim with the Seabed Authority at the United Nations to claim what is called your outer continental shelf, so your continental shelf beyond those 200 nautical miles. And I don't know whether, I don't think the U.S. has actually submitted a claim or whether it's been tested if we can submit a claim as a non-party to Law of the Sea. I think Russia was the first one to submit a claim, but we've been doing research on our continental shelf since 2001, and it's quite a significant submission and fact-finding in order to actually make that submission. And this is not the most in-focus slide, I apologize, but I just thought this was sort of interesting. Another international body of water that's interesting to note is what are called international straits, and it's basically where countries' EEZ or 12 nautical miles overlap with their other waters or with an EEZ of another state. So we have the Chukchi Sea, which connects the Pacific Ocean, or sorry, the Bering Sea, which connects the Pacific Ocean to the Chukchi Sea and then to the Arctic Ocean. And so that is the international dateline, but it also basically follows the US-Russia maritime boundary. So in 1990, when countries have overlapping EEZs, they have to create a treaty between the two countries. And that's the longest maritime boundary line is between the US and Russia when we created that treaty in 1990. And it also established an interconsultative committee which deals with fisheries issues. And we actually had a negotiation here with Russia at the Monterey Institute, who was gracious enough to give us space at one of the meetings. So as I mentioned before, the EEZ is 3.4 million square kilometers. So it's bigger than our actual land. So it's a really important economic zone for us. And in order to manage the fisheries in this area, the U.S. has created regional councils. So there's 8 regional councils, and they're quasi-government bodies with a NOAA oversight. It's the Magnuson-Stevenson Act is the major piece of legislation that governs these fisheries councils, and they're between state and fed. So they have federal non-voting members, federal voting members, and state voting members that are appointed by the governor. So, like for example, the North Pacific Fisheries Management Council has 6 members appointed by the governor of Alaska, 1 by Washington, 1 by Oregon, and then there's NOAA as a federal member, and then there's not their U.S. Coast Guard sits there for enforcement as a non-federal state, Department of State sits there for international issues, and then Fish and Wildlife. But so Alaska has a lot of control in the North Pacific. So it's they're very political, which just bear that in mind as we move out into the international world. So those councils manage the fish that are moving between the 200 nautical miles. And then those resources are also going between our boundary and our neighbor's boundary. So we have bilateral agreements on fisheries issues with Canada, Mexico, Russia, and we also have one with 17 Pacific Island states. It's considered a bilateral because they all have overlapping EEZs, and it's basically bilateral to access, to allow for our vessels to access their fishing grounds. So is this sort of on point with what you guys were hoping to hear with introduction? Just making sure, if I can change it anyway. So just to let you know, some of our bilaterals with Canada, one of them is the Halibut Commission, which is the oldest fisheries treaty that the U.S. has, so that's interesting. But the 2 that I was going to talk about were salmon and albacore. And it's North Pacific albacore. So when we created our EEZ, we also created the American Fisheries Act, which kicked all foreign vessels out of our economic zone. Except for Canada, who's allowed to fish 1 species in our waters, which is North Pacific albacore. And it was basically a preservation, an attempt to preserve the fishing grounds and a sort of an assumption that the albacore would be moving from the north to the south based on climate and weather and different conditions in the ocean. But in the 41 years that the treaty's been in place, we've significantly fished in Canada's water 3 out of those years. Where Canada catches about 80% of its catch in our waters on a regular basis. And when we negotiated the treaty with Canada, they were catching like 400 metric tons with a handful of boats, and now they catch 5,000 metric tons, and we're up to over 200 boats at one point, and it became extremely contentious. So this is a modern picture of a commercial albacore. It looks like a recreational vessel, but it's not. This is how they do it. They hook their toes underneath there, and they use pole and line to catch these fish. It's one of like the last old school fisheries out there. And basically it's an artificial bait that they throw in the water. And then when they yank the fish up over them, the bait releases from the fish's mouth, the fish lands on the vessel floor, where it basically stays, because these are canned tuna, so it's not, the sashimi grade tuna has a different, is by jig, but it's also basically a pole and line operation, but it's done by jig, and it has a blast release. But the ones that go in the cans, they just sit on the deck until the process, and these guys are just yanking fish out of the water, and they're pulling the smaller fish from the surface. So it's contentious when the vessels come up on the fish because they split the stock. So you're already fishing on a smaller pool, and then you're sharing that pool with someone else. So they get very upset when Canada comes over and crowds the fishing grounds. And in 2013 or 2012, they sort of hit their limit, and they refused to let Canada in. The industry was united, and then Canada shut down our port access, because part of the treaty also allows for port access, which our guys really like to go up there to come into port, to work on our vessels, to pick up crew, to pick up supplies, to sell and offload. So now the industry is more split because they don't want to lose the port access. But this is a huge thing in the world of fisheries that very few people know about, and it's actually been renegotiated this year. So the next one is salmon, also a very contentious issue with Canada. For whatever reason, salmon is an iconic species, and it really creates a lot of emotional uproar in people when you talk about salmon. And at one point, Canada blocked our vessels with a ferry, and which is really an act of war, like a blockade, as I'm sure you're aware, is like a declaration of war. And so we refer to these years as the salmon wars, and there was a lot of fighting on the fishing ground. And in 1985, we negotiated the Pacific Salmon Treaty with Canada that sets up a commission where I hope I'm not talking too fast for the interpretation, but we set up, slow down a little bit. So I was telling them, they're like, well,
There's a lot of technical terms that you probably.
Yeah, when I do formal negotiations, I often have interpreters say, well, the delegate from the US, please slow down. so even professionals that have been here for many years have asked me to slow down. So in any event, so I'm just trying to get through a lot of info. So we have this commission that basically works on how many fish we can intercept that are Canadian fish, and how many fish Canada can intercept that are US fish, as well as how many fish we have to pass up the river to Canada so that they can reproduce in the future. So this is a really interesting issue, I thought, because it came to our domestic council in the North Pacific because we weren't meeting our obligations, because we literally wrote a hard number in the treaty for the Yukon Agreement, which is one of the longest rivers that a salmon has to travel to reproduce, and it goes from Alaska all the way up to Canada, Whitehorse in Canada. And so Canada came and testified at the Fisheries Council, our domestic council, and the council took an unprecedented act of putting a hard cap on the pollock industry, who were catching these fish, catching salmon as bycatch. And basically, people were calling them kills, and they basically have to throw the fish away because they're not allowed to keep them. And so now, although they set the hard cap pretty high, but if the pollock industry hits that cap, they're tied up at the dock. So pollock cannot fish if they hit a certain number of, and the data is taken in real time, reported to NOAA. NOAA keeps the count, and then if they hit that number, so it was a pretty significant, and it was also very contentious discussion in the council. I landed on the front page of the paper. It was tough times, but it was a really impressive move, and it's one of the many moves that North Pacific Council has had that was really a frontier in conservation management, was to put a hard cap on bycatch. But the area that we're concerned with is the high seas area, which is also the Wild West, and it's quite vast. Of the 335 million kilometers squared of ocean that envelops this globe, 204 million square kilometers are high seas. So it is very difficult to monitor and survey that amount of ocean, and it is really the Wild West out there. And fishing vessels are probably the least regulated out of any vessel on the high seas. So, in addition to bilaterals, we have multilateral agreements with countries, and usually it's a coastal state that it has the EEZ that borders the high seas, and a distant fishing water nation that comes, or coastal states in an area that come together to put together these multilateral agreements. And there was two that I'm going to tell you about, which are slightly related, which is called the donut hole, and I didn't have a picture of the donut hole, more than one picture of the donut hole, and then the Arctic Ocean. So the donut hole is actually, ignoring the fact that it says for official use only, but the donut hole is actually a part of, when you measure out the EEZs between the US and Russia, you get a pocket of high seas area that is considered high seas, and at one time it was prevalent with pollock, and Korea, Japan, Canada, the US, Russia, and Poland fished for pollock there very, very heavily in the late 70s. And the fishery completely collapsed, and it's become a poster child for unregulated fishing on the high seas. And especially for these coastal states, because it was sad for us, because it was a big moneymaker. Pollock is $1 billion fishery. People have different theories. It's been a 25-year moratorium. These countries get together and discuss the fact that there are no fish in it. The last time they ran a test fishery through it, they caught 2 fish total, which I like to say were the last bonded pair of pollock in the area. But in the 25 years, the fishery has never recovered, and it needs to recover to a particular biomass in order for them to trigger the setting of attack, a total allowable catch. And so the people have different theories on why that is, because usually a fishery will begin to recover, it becomes economically unfeasible to fish at some point, and then the fish on its own naturally recovers because they're left alone. And some people feel, back in the day, they weren't really fishing in this area, that they didn't have GPS, and so people thought they were fishing in this area, but they were likely closer into the U.S. on our shelf where the pollock tend to hang out, because the pollock don't tend to hang out on the abyssal plain where the donut hole is. And other people think that there was just a huge population boom of the pollock that pushed the pollock offshore in search of more space and food, or it could have been a climate change that the food was chasing. But nonetheless, we shake the donut hole in front of people's faces to make them nervous, and one of the areas that we did that on was for the Arctic Ocean, and they actually call the high pocket area of the Arctic Ocean now the Arctic donut hole to ring the bell. And the scientists looked at, NOAA scientists looked at 2 different decades of data on fish distribution, and not surprisingly, they found out that fish distribution was a factor of not only where the parents of the fish reproduce, but the currents where the larvae take them, but that both of those things were being influenced by climate, and that 43% of the fish that they looked at had changed their distribution and the timing of their distribution, and 50% of those were adult fish. And so what they're finding is they are actually moving northwardly. I mean, not all of the fish, like the tropical tunas, are going to head up to the Arctic, but there are some fish that are able to branch out, which means that their food is going there. The phytoplankton and the zooplankton that they're chasing and eating are also going up there. So the U.S. led an effort where they got the coastal states of the Arctic Ocean, which would be Russia, Canada, the U.S., Greenland, Denmark for Greenland and the Faroe Islands, and Norway to sign a declaration saying that they wouldn't authorize their vessels to fish in this area. And they also established a scientific body to study the area, because even though there's no fishing going on, there is other types of exploration, oil and gas exploration, and so we really need a baseline of what's happening so that when a management mechanism is in fact established, it's not shooting from the hip, but it actually has data to go on, because most of them are just established and they don't really have a lot of data to go on except for shaky logbooks. So other than bilaterals, multilateral agreements, there is also regional fisheries management organizations, and these are the big dogs of high seas fisheries management, and we have 17 regional fisheries management organizations. And 5 of those, so basically the regional fisheries management organization, again, is just like you see in the US. It's a group of countries that come together, that negotiate a treaty. The treaty lays out how the countries are going to play in the sandbox together, all the way to how much they donate to get the commission to actually function and be able to make decisions. So they'll create a secretariat. That secretariat will manage the commission will be created, the commission makes decisions, they're all made a little bit differently, but in general they all have scientific bodies that either their experts are from their countries are part of the scientists that create the scientific advice, or they'll use an international organization with competency in that particular area and go to them for the scientific advice. So they're all a little different, but in general they have all these components. And the only difference between an organization and an arrangement is much looser. They don't have a secretariat and there's only one of them, which is CAMLAR, which is down at the bottom, which is for the Antarctic living marine resources. And some of them have an oversight role or an ecosystem role like CAMLAR, and others have very species-specific roles. So depending on where they are, and of the 17 Archimos, 5 of them are tuna Archimos. So the interesting thing about the tuna Archimos, other than the fact that they don't always just manage tuna, but they tuna-like species, so marlin and swordfish, which circumnavigate the globe. You'll see the color of that establishes the convention area for these Archimos, regional fisheries management organizations, goes right up to the shore. So even though the fish is in the economic zone or the jurisdiction of the particular country, the country is agreeing to harvest that fish according to the standards set out by the Archimo, not our own domestic body, because we've come to realize that you have to look at it as one population in order to manage it sustainably. And so some of those fish move between the different Archimos, and so there's overlap of jurisdiction of one particular species. So the Archimos have tried to get together. The tuna Archimos in particular have tried to get together and create and work together to create one vessel list so they can know who all the bad actors are, so the bad actors can't just move from one spot to another. And the first meeting was in Kobe, Japan, and so it's called the Kobe Tuna Archimo meeting, where the 5 come together at least once a year. But, so some of the Archimos were, so before we get to that, so other than the species-specific Archimos, you have Archimos that are geographically specific. And this doesn't show, but there's one that was just recently created within the past 4 or 5 years for the North Pacific. And then there's one in the South Pacific, the North Atlantic, Northeast Atlantic, Southeast Atlantic, the Indian Ocean, and then the NASCO is specific for salmon in the North Atlantic. And then they manage a variety of species within those Archimos. And so some of the Archimos were created back in the 60s, such as ICAT, which manages the tuna in the North Atlantic. They didn't have concepts of ecosystem considerations, how much fish you leave behind for the rest of the ecosystem, what kind of damage you're doing to the ecosystem by what you're removing. They didn't consider bycatch species or species of particular concern like turtles and seabirds. Some of the newer Archimos do, like the Western Central Pacific does, but again, like the ones built in the 60s don't. And the biggest problem, of course, is shark conservation. So tuna and sharks tend to be caught on the same line, and they tend to swim together. And so there's a huge depletion of sharks, and the countries from the particular Archimos won't manage the sharks because they don't feel that they have a mandate from the convention to manage them because they're very species specific the way they're written. So some of these conventions are being renegotiated to address that. And so what you see like on the upper left-hand corner is a hammerhead getting finned. And so some people hear, oh, well, the Archimos have a finning ban, that's great, they ban finning, but they don't really ban finning. Finning is actually the act of cutting off that fin and throwing the shark live back at sea. So that's what they ban, but they ban it through a ratio. And it's a set ratio across the board, but sharks look different. Some sharks, like threshers, have huge fins to bodies, others have short fins to bodies, and there's no species requirement. So some sharks have fins that are high grade, grade A fins that you can trade in Hong Kong for a lot of money, and some have really good meat. So you could have a mix of species of sharks and fins and still meet the finning ban because nobody's checking genetics at the dock on these fish. And so, so the finning bans are loose at best. They're a step in the right direction. And other issues that our firms face are issues with enforcement, monitoring, capacity. Like we said, it's a big ocean. They try to address this through catch documentation scheme, which will track a piece of tuna, which is much harder than you think, around the world. They try to address capacity through effort, and I'm not sure how much you guys know about fishing, but capacity and effort are linked, but they're not quite the same thing. So what they'll do is they'll try to limit vessel days, and the fishermen will go out and get a bigger, better, faster boat that catches more fish in less days. So they're smart, they game the system. So it's sort of a constant moving target for them. And then there's other international bodies such as the UN General Assembly, the Convention for International Trade of Endangered Species, CITES, the Convention for Migratory Species, and those also all play a role in natural resource management, fisheries management. And then there's big umbrella policies and laws, which one we talked about was Law of the Sea. Under Law of the Sea is the Code of Conduct, and the 1995 agreement for highly migratory and starling stocks. And then there's negotiations that outline those agreements, and then they have a resumed review conference that looks at that. They have a fisheries resolution every year at the UN, which has the consensus of the General Assembly. So even though you don't get the political will at the RFMO to put a shark fin naturally attached, you can take it to the UN, you can get those guys to agree to it, then it's adopted by the General Assembly, then you bring it back to the RFMO, so it puts more political pressure because the whole world under the General Assembly has passed this, and then the FAO itself, the Food and Agricultural Organization, has plans of action for seabirds, sharks, bycatch, and the IUU fishing. So that's the basics of how, I think I might skip the bluefin tuna case study, and if anybody really wants to hear about it, we'll come back to it just so I can get through this. So how are we doing? We're not necessarily on fire, but things aren't fantastic. 80% of the world's fish stocks are either overexploited or fully exploited. Of the tuna, which are managed very well, 30% are overexploited or depleted, 53% are fully exploited, and 18% are moderately exploited. Sharks, we have really bad data on it, but the general belief is 60% of all sharks are exploited. FAO did a study that in 2006, which was one of the highest years on record for catching for fish, they caught 110 million tons of fish for human consumption. Over 50% of that was wild captured fish, and 80% of the wild captured fish came from the ocean. And there was a value of like $91.2 billion. And so the FAO also did a study that found that the fisheries are an underperforming global asset that have been fully exploited. So if you have an underperforming asset that is fully exploited, it sort of definitely points at management a little bit. That's where you would find the crink in your business plan there. And so the problem is effective governance. But to be fair, it's not just that. It's the information that they're working on to make the decisions. Not just the fact that they don't have the political will to follow the scientific advice, but the scientific advice is not that great because people are not reporting, there's illegal activity taking place, or people are not reporting the catch. How the FAO reports the catch is a problem. But before I get to all that, I just wanted to say that it's important to recognize that 79% of all fish production took place in developing countries, and the developing world is relying more and more on fish as a source of protein. So it's becoming a pretty significant problem because it's becoming a food security issue. And this here is jack mackerel, which is interesting. It's called Chilean jack mackerel, which is neither a jack nor a mackerel. So I don't know how it got that name. But they swim in bait balls, and they're very easy to scoop out of the water, and they're overexploited. And they're mostly caught to feed livestock and aquaculture. And yeah, it's depressing. And so it takes about 5 pounds of jack mackerel to feed 1 pound of salmon. So if you think aquaculture is the answer, it's not that simple. So part of the problem is the art of counting fish, right? You can't see them. It's not like you can go on a Serengeti plane and count how many elephants you see. They're all underwater, so you have to find creative ways of getting that information. This is a slide that the FAO uses on how the FAO gets data. So if you can imagine that there's going to be some error in playing a game of telephone, right? So just in human error in transmitting even what you think are big numbers. Then you have IUU fishing, which is illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, which is actual piracy that literally takes place on the high seas, that has human trafficking involved with it. They have slave labor involved with it. They actually capture people and take them out at sea and don't feed them and give them horrible conditions and force them to fish, which helps bring the prices down at market. And yeah, so there's that. That was just the general bad actors, and then there's just bad reporting. So basically, they rely on logbooks. Scientists that rides along in a fishing boat that does an extrapolation of the samples of the fish that are being caught to figure out what catch per unit effort is, and then a scientist will actually just go out and do straight up research for age class, distribution, age size, and sex distribution of the fish to determine how the population is doing. So orange roughy is one of the fish that are caught in the Indian Ocean. It's in every single grocery store. You can't go anywhere and not see orange roughy. I think we import like 19 million pounds per year. It lives to 149 years, so the longer a fish lives, the more susceptible it is to exploitation because it takes longer to get to sexual maturity, so it's easier to yank them out before they've actually had a chance to make more. And orange roughy is, they did a study looking at orange roughy and they found that that even the reported fish is actually underreported, and that the 109 million metric tons that they thought were being reported was actually, that 32 million metric tons of fish were actually unreported of that. So that it was more like, what is it? It was like a 20% misreport of total reportings. And in 1996, which they thought was the highest year on record, which they reported 86 million, when they extrapolated the numbers of the bad reporting, they found that it was really 130 million metric tons. So that's part of the problem. It's hard to dial in a sustainable number when your numbers are that off. Artisanal, this is in West Africa. This is an actual scene of an artisanal fishery that's taking place. At one time, artisanal fisheries were just not considered. They were like, oh, small scale, they don't do anything fisheries. They've now found that they actually contributed to 25% of global catch. So they're not insignificant at all. And so, and beyond that, Africa lets foreign nations like China come and fish their waters, and China fishes more than anyone else, and their data is one of the most unreliable data of what it is that they catch. And they were reporting about 386,000 tons of fish taken in West Africa, and when they actually went in and really looked at what's out in the trade, they found out it was more like 4.6 million tons that they were taking, at a value of 7 billion. So it's the lack of really good data on the fish is one of the biggest problems, in addition to governance and in addition to being able to monitor effectively these areas. And there's a lot of factors that deal with fisheries that I'm not able to get to, like trade and subsidies and transshipping and loss of abandoned gear, impact to habitat, but it's all really too much to cover in a short period of time. But although the situation is serious, it's not without hope. The days of rampant fishing are over. The U.S. has a ton of success stories of rebuilding our stocks and our fisheries. We've learned it takes longer than what we anticipated it does, but they do come back. And so the habitat does rebound. So there's no shortages of problems to be filled and opportunities for bright, creative minds to get out there and make a difference and bring a new set of eyes on it. So I don't want to paint a picture like it's hopeless at all. And I just give you a really quick background. I started out as a marine biologist, and I got a job studying freshwater, white sturgeon up on the Snake and Columbia River. And then from there I studied salmon passing through the dams. And I learned really quickly that issues of fisheries was not just a habitat issue, but it was really political. Salmon is a good intro into political problems with fisheries management. So then I wanted to go into policy, but I wanted to stay marine, so I wanted it to be international. And so I scoured the internet, and Ms. was, I don't even know how I found it. It was new in terms of dealing with fisheries issues and environmental issues at the time, that IEP part. But it was really the only institution that was offering a degree. And so I came here and I got my degree, and then I went back out to the Pacific Northwest, and I worked for the Department of Energy in a regional office called the Bonneville Power Administration, which markets and transmits the energy and the one, we try not to let people on the East Coast know that the government actually supplies energy on the West Coast, because the East Coast pays a lot of money for energy. But I worked in the Environment and Wildlife Department implementing the Endangered Species Act, which mostly focused on salmon on the main stem tributaries and estuary, and I was their lead scientist for a little while as well. And then I got really dismayed that a lot of decisions were made from an emotional place and not from a rational and science. I left. I started my own NGO, which focused on social media, creating communication pieces to sway decision makers. And right when my NGO was doing really good and taking off, I got offered an opportunity to work for the State Department, which was at the time my dream job. And so I went and I was a fisheries negotiator for state for a little over 7 years, representing them around the world, including the UN, and that's where I was really exposed to the good, the bad, the ugly of international fisheries management. But it was a really good experience. And now I do, then I actually left state because I was really anxious to climb the ladder and make more money and have, be a supervisor, and it's so hard to do that in government because people stay in those jobs forever. You have to wait for somebody to retire or pass to get a position, and so I was really anxious to, to make my mark, and so I left and I took this job with this really small NGO that had the right title and it had the right salary. It was all the things that I thought I needed for my career, and then I got there and it was just a really bad fit. And I learned that those aren't the reasons that you set for taking a job at all, because they don't get you out of bed on a Monday morning. And that happens sometimes. The people that you're working with are good people, and they do good stuff, and you're a good person, and but that doesn't make it a perfect fit. And so and you have to learn how to just not blame anybody, especially yourself, and just kind of keep on, and move on. And anyway, so I decided to start a consulting business, which actually has gone really well, and albacore fishermen are one of my clients. Although I might be losing them as a client because the albacore did not return this year. They're at the end of the season and they're at 50% of their annual catch. And some of them are actually out of business because sometimes fishermen, it's boom or bust for them. They only have one season a year. They're financing their boat. If they don't have money in the bank, they don't have a 5-year business plan. It's all hand to mouth. So some of those guys are going under, unfortunately. But my biggest advice for you guys would be to follow your to follow your passion, because honestly that's the only thing that's really going to get you out of bed on a Monday morning. And sometimes you might be super excited to go to bed on a Sunday just so you can wake up on a Monday and leave. That's how I was when I started at state. I could not wait for Monday to come so I could get in there and work for the State Department. I just think luckiest girl in the world on the way to work. But sometimes it goes, you know what I mean? You get exposed to the same thing over and over again. You see the underbelly of politics and the good old boy system, and that's okay. That's going to happen. Things are gonna wax and wane, and just keep searching for your passion. Keep searching for what's fueling you. Never settle. It's short, but life is long. It's never too late to make a switch or a change. And I think the biggest advice I could give somebody that was starting out is really focus on relationships over competence. A lot of people want to prove themselves and they want to do a good job. I think women do this more so than men, and get out there and get so focused on doing a good job that you're not really paying attention to how the dynamics work, how you're being received, what are some of the other subtle things that are going on. And you think, oh, if I prove myself, that's what matters. But really, relationships matter. Look at who can rise to the potential of presidency. It's all about charisma and relationships and getting people on your side. And so that's really should always be your focus, is to learn the dynamics, how people are interacting, what are the relationships between them before you focus, and then let competence come later, and listen and talk. And I think that everybody when I came to Minnesota, I was so anxious to get out there and save the world and do something big. And I really think now, 2 decades later, that I believe that honestly the biggest contribution that anybody can make is just sharing love and kindness in the world. So always make that the most important thing, because you might be in a negotiation or across the table from somebody who does not see the world your way, or frustrated or down by, environment is not an easy field to work in. And if the end of your years, as the light is dimming, what you're gonna look back on are your moments, your pause, your love-filled pauses, and your sharing of love and kindness more than anything else. And I think that's, if you strive to do that a little bit every day, then that's the biggest success that you can really have in life. So, sorry for the touchy-feely end there, but that's honestly my how I feel about it. So that's.
I think that's well received in this part of the world.
So that's it. So if you guys have questions for me, I'm happy to take questions. And I am interested in expanding more into doing podcasts. I want to do work with fishermen and a blog and work more for social media and do videos. So if you guys have any interest in that, there's always opportunity to collaborate with me. Jason has all my information. So, and it doesn't have to be now. It can be down the road or whatever.
What kind of podcast are you thinking about?
Well, I'm kind of scared to say because I haven't really started it. And I mentioned it to someone the other day, and they're like, oh, it's a really good idea. I was like, we're going to run out and do it. It's a good point. But I think it would be really fun to interview captains and fishermen on boats and put a little, like, pick a topic and then go through it, you know, either have one character that's good enough or you have a bunch of different ones. And so.
What's the one, the reality show, The Dangerous Catch or something? So not that, Deadliest Catch.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, so not that.
No, more like the NPR guy, Mark Maron was who started his podcast in his garage as a comedian. Yeah, more like along that lines, where he interviews other comedians and more real and raw and less
sensationalist.
Yeah, sensationalist.
So questions?
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, is there a downside to all these new preservation areas, Hawaii, French Polynesia, the Atlantic? It seems like you're creating a smaller pond for a lot of these fishing vessels.
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. So I actually had that in my, but I was trying to stay positive as much as I could. So in one of my social media, I sort of lambasted the State Department, which is easy to do now that I'm all with them, because they have this annual oceans conference, and it was in Chile last year, where there's jack mackerel, which is a huge problem. And what they did was they declared X number of kilometers a marine reserve, and that's exactly what it does. It runs things underground because in the end, people still need to eat, people still need to feed themselves with their own businesses, and there's demand for fish. And so if you just create huge swaths of marine preserves and these protected communities, protected swaths of ocean, you're not addressing the problem at all. And not to say that there's not a place or a time for those things, but they're so far from the answer. But yet it's the easiest thing for many NGOs to do, and I don't need to be too critical because it's sexy and splashy for them, and NGOs have a payroll to make, and they want to make sure that they're keeping all their employees, and they need their donors to see results. And that's kind of hard to say, well, we got more data, more accurate data this year. That's not sexy and splashy for donors, but we shut down this much amount of ocean that is, but it's not really addressing the problem. So that's astute of you to notice. And not only that, the one that Obama just declared up in the Northeast, that has a lot of people very angry because in order to create a marine preserve, there is a legislative process that you have to follow where the stakeholders give input and they talk about whether it's good or not good. But they use the Antiquities Act, which is just a presidential declaration. You don't have to go through that process, and it doesn't matter who you're putting out of business when you do that. And so the NGOs sort of cleverly found that, but it doesn't. It's just isolating people in the problem and not really addressing the problem. So it'll be interesting to see if that sticks or not.
I was just going to follow up, but our marine protected area is sort of at least part of the solution, because the idea is that you're setting up certain areas that are no-take zones so that the fisheries can rebound. So I'm just curious to hear why you think they don't address it at all.
No, I'm sorry. I did try to say that I feel like they do have their time and their place, and for sure, especially on the West Coast where the concept of marine protected areas was really birthed, they have shown that when you leave a little area aside, my understanding of when they started on the West Coast, I think through Pisco, through Dane, Luchenko was one of the big proponents of them. When you set that little piece aside, you let the fish grow to a certain size, you see bigger fish, more fish, because you have that protected area. But it is so that they can trickle out on the side and that people can fish them eventually. But what they're doing is they're shutting down huge swaths of ocean, which is not the same thing as creating a small preserve or protecting. It's one thing if you want to protect pristine habitat, by all means, please do, because there's so little of it out there. But a lot of them are shutting down their entire EEZs, such huge swaths of ocean, and that isn't really addressing the problem. And I was going to say something about things that they could do is shut down, like, one of the problems is they fish on the reproduction grounds. They could do time-limited closures that aren't solid marine preserves, but it's more expensive because you have to monitor it. And that's the other thing, when they make huge giant preserves like that, they have no way of actually monitoring that and ensuring that they're going to stay, that people are going to stay out of them and not fish them when they're so big like that, when you can't even control them. I'm sorry, right behind me, yeah, what do you think?
I mean, it sort of goes with that one. I read about the new preserve in the Atlantic, and one of the fishermen or one of the leaders, proposed the idea of like, why not just change the depths that we can fish at, so that we can still keep fishing there. I mean, do you consider that like a plausible alternative?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things they could do other than it's just easier. You know what I mean? It's like the least common denominator. It's easier to shut it down. It's easier to monitor it. It's, how would they have the depth of that? It all just takes more and more money to try to monitor that. And the U.S. has the resources more so than other countries do. And so, but yeah, that was the one in the Atlantic was the Antiquities Act that really upset a lot of people.
I was wondering, because obviously you said that by shutting these areas down, you can affect a lot of people where this is their livelihood. But how do you deal with an issue such as, when you said, basically the ocean has been overfished, and so far we haven't been able to come up with a way to attempt to really allow the ocean to replenish, like give it a moment to just reproduce and actually come back. How do you do it internationally without just saying you can't fish here for a while, or you can't take this species, like these drastic measures that just sort of eliminate the possibility of fishing, because otherwise, in terms of monitoring or whatever it is, it's very difficult, not impossible, but really
Right.
difficult to do that.
Well, so they do that to a certain extent, right? So they'll reduce catch after. But the thing is when you shut down something entirely, you're not addressing all the issues. You might be addressing the fact that the fish is being depleted, but you're not addressing the fact that there's hungry, stomachs, and you're not addressing the fact that people are making a living off of it. And I'm not saying that any one of those things are more important than the other, but you do have to strike a balance if you want those people to respect the closed area, because otherwise desperation will drive people to do whatever they want. And so I think it's important to strike that balance, and the ARCMOs do that. They will reduce catch per unit effort. They'll reduce the total allowable catch that any one particular country can take. They'll do time area closures, and I think that the important part is finding the balance that really addresses all of the issues. They'll shut down the fishing grounds during reproduction, which sometimes aren't always shut down. That's one of the issues with albacore is that they reproduce on the equator, it's not monitored, and the longliners go and fish them while they're trying to make more albacore. So, but there are times for draconian measures, but in general, there's a balance between it, because one of the things I mentioned about data is that when the FAA doesn't get data, I don't know if I mentioned this, they put a 0 in, which is not reflective of no data. It means no fish are caught. And so that, and they were also thinking that, fishing's declining, but it's not. People are moving from area to area and catching less fish, but fishing's not declining. So I just saw it and like, okay.
Yes, so I was wondering, are these RFMOs and national trees taking into account the future effects of climate change on fish stocks? If today we're at 80% overexploitation of global fish stocks, then are we headed towards total collapse?
Well, I don't think that we're headed towards total collapse, because, I know maybe that's my little tangent positivism there, but first of all, a species becomes economically unviable before it actually disappears, although we have had species disappear. But, so usually, especially like in a fish area, you know, it's harder to find fish than it is, you know, the gland species that become endangered. So, so there's that, they just become economically unviable to catch them, and then they leave them alone in the population, which we saw with cod, right? But, no, to answer your question, no, like, unless it's written in the treaty, which some of them back in the day had no idea about climate change, they won't necessarily address it or spend money on it. The U.S. is just now embarking on an effort through NOAA where they're looking at what are the tools we have in our toolbox to deal with climate change, because it's a matter, I mean, there's all these other effects of habitat, sea level rise, but then it's just like these fish are going to migrate outside of the convention areas, and how, you know, what are the tools that we have to deal with that, to manage fisheries, and it's sort of it's an esoteric concept that we haven't really had a chance to really wrap our heads around yet, and we're just now embarking on looking on it. But I would say, like, that's a luxury of a developed country.
It seemed like the situation was extremely critical. And it doesn't seem like much is being done.
Well, I don't want to paint the picture that not much is being done, because you know, there's big meetings going on out there, you know, trying to address these issues, and there's a lot of people working on it. So, I mean, nothing moves as fast as you would like it to move, for sure. But I wouldn't say that nothing's being done. But I definitely don't think that there's been enough effort of looking at the nexus of climate change and fish, other than the fact that fish are moving. But in terms of what are the tools that we have to deal with adaptive management with climate impacts on fish, I think that that's probably a hole that could be filled, if it interests you.
I was kind of curious about your thoughts about the Magnuson-Stevens Act being used by other countries, and that in the United States you can't fish in data poor places because you just don't have the data there. And for your data poor concept, were you referencing Works working group for when they put the 0 in? When the FAO receives data and they compile their data on fisheries, if they don't get any data, their entry is a 0, no data. But I'm not sure what you mean when you say that the Magnuson-Stevens says that you can't fish in data poor areas. And I have to say, like, my domestic knowledge, despite I sat on the council for 7 years, isn't as strong as international. But they're considered data tiers, right? You have a tier 1 all the way to like a tier 4 or 5. And like, for like example, octopus, we have no real information on the population of octopus, but they're still allowed to be fished to a certain extent. In the North Pacific, they're considered a tier 4, which is a super data poor. So I'm not sure what the Magnuson says about not fishing on data poor, because I know we do manage fisheries based on the paucity of data. So I don't know what level you have to get before you can't fish. But. It's basically when it was written and been amended basically in early 2000s, that you're supposed to have gone through a rigorous study to say this is what the baseline data is at, and then so you would know what is going to be your MSY.
Right.
And then you collaborate with the 8 regional groups. But that's also now their time series is all off because NOAA just changed how they're doing the data collection. That's a totally different issue.
Yeah,
But yes, there are the tier 1s through 4, and you can fish in certain levels, but it's supposed to be after you've had years of data collection.
I think that's for setting TAC and setting allowable catch. But when they allow them to keep the bycatch and sell it, because there's 2 types of bycatch. There's the bycatch which is trash fish, which you don't want, which is taking up space in your hook, and then there's a bycatch that actually has like a value to it. So sable fish is often caught in the bycatch fishery under halibut, and so there's no tax set for sable fish, and there's very little known about the population of the sable fish, but they allow them to sell them. So I think it depends on, I think that is specific for, and again, like I shouldn't even answer this question because I'm not as strong on the domestic management, but I think that's for setting TAC, that you can't set TAC in a data poor situation.
For total allowable
Total
catch,
allowable.
MSY, maximum sustainable
Sustainable
yield.
yield.
Yeah, just be careful with the acronyms.
Sorry.
You know. Yeah, not everybody knows.
hand up before.
It was, somebody asked a question.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you with the water bottle.
I just wanted to follow up on the point that Nash was like being done. I think it's like there's a lot of different things that are happening at different levels all around the world, and even if things are like pretty bad, I think a lot of good things are like happening right now, and we're at a time where more people like around the world are like ever committed to doing work on fisheries and on ocean stuff. There was the Our Ocean Conference in DC just last week. In 2 days, like people from all around the world committed 5.3 billion just on like ocean work. So that's pretty encouraging.
Yeah.
There's some like big pictures here.
Yeah.
Things are bad, but they may be as good as they.
So in Norway committed like 6 million
Yeah.
for climate study the last time, but yes, there are
That's the
good,
time
but
frame.
wait, how is that money being used and where is that money being come to? That's a lot of money.
That's like I guess that's.
So, yeah, so, but yes, there are definitely positive stories and people, everyone loves the oceans, everyone is trying to help us to some level.
I wanted to see what your vision of the future looked like in regards to Ross Sea and with
The Ross?
Ross Sea, yes, and toothfish, the Chilean sea bass.
This is Antarctica, right?
Antarctica, yeah, and so it's been a long time since I've been exposed to like camelar and things like that, but I think it's once there's an area that's been designated as a take zone, it can't go back to a no-take zone. And so because they have allowed fishers into that area, now they have to kind of renegotiate the treaty or something. I'm a little hazy on it.
Yeah, I mean, I've never worked on, so CAMLAR is the Convention for the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources. I never worked on CAMLAR issues, so I'm not as familiar with the convention. I would be shocked if they actually had language in the convention that said once this happens, you can't ever go back, because they don't ever like to really box themselves into anything. So I think like the free will of the commission will allow them to do whatever they want, and they can always open the convention up, which is very tricky to renegotiate it. But toothfish is like a little bit like the case study for bluefin tuna that I skipped over, in that the Convention for International Trade of Endangered Species labeled Patagonia toothfish, or was going to consider listing Patagonia toothfish. And the international community gets very, and they did the same thing for bluefin tuna because of issues in the Mediterranean with IUU. And the international community that deals with these issues gets very nervous when anything marine goes to CITES, especially the Asians, because a lot of whales have gone to CITES, and they can feel like they will never get them off of the CITES list. And which basically there's 3 different appendices associated with CITES, and depending on which appendices they're listed on, it limits the amount of trade and therefore how many they can take. But so toothfish was one of them, and because Patagonia toothfish was having such a bad time, they brought it to CITES, and so CITES created an MOU, I think, a memorandum of understanding with CAMLAR to help them manage fisheries. But it's very, so what happened with, the same thing happened with bluefin tuna, where they, this fish that was managed for a long time, even longer than toothfish, by CAMLAR, by ICAT, was now being brought in front of another international body, which basically said that the ARCMO failed. And the ARCMO had already had a review of it and had gotten an F in the review anyway. But this was even bigger, because now you really need to advocate competence of your main species that you got together to manage, bluefin above all other tuna, to this other organization which is now going to regulate your trade. And so it was highly contentious, not only in the international community, but in the US. And so Fish and Wildlife, it has the authority over CITES, and then NOAA has marine issues, and then state has international. We did both CITES and bluefin back then, and we literally had to go to the White House to CEQ, which is the Center for Environmental Quality. It's an office of the West Wing that was established under war, and to a group called the God Squad, And there's actually a movie about the God Squad and the snowy owl, and then they basically decide whether something's worth saving or not. They are the final decision in the US. And there was all this fighting with these grown people in their own country, you know, all on the same team around the table about whether we could take this fish to studies or not. So anyway, they did that with patagonia toothfish back in the 90s, I think. And it was very successful for them. So I think that hopefully patagonia toothfish will continue to be better managed and better regulated. But I don't know how to answer whether they can go back to a no-take zone or not. But Hamler does have a lot of problems with IUU fishing.
I just know that there's a lot of commercial fishery or commercial fishing taking place increasingly in the area, so I was
Yeah,
just kind of curious.
yeah, there is. There's a movie called The Ross Sea that came out
It's a good movie.
that talks about it, yeah.
Mike McGinnis does a lot of work on that too.
Yeah, it does.
Anybody else?
So kind of going back a little bit to like the whole, like, we're in a dire situation and let's hopeful. In your experience, what have you seen in the industry that has changed or is shifting, either in the past or currently, that you think is like a positive aspect that has started to come about?
Well, that's a good question. Thank you for it. So I would say one thing that definitely has shifted, that's a very, very positive, is the industry, right? So the industry used to kick and scream. And I would say now the industry is almost more conservation oriented than the NGOs, because the NGOs, I think, tend to fall more into the idealistic, non-practical categories because of their own business model, the way that's set up. But the industry realizes that their bread and butter is in conservation, and they're a powerful voice, and they have a lot of money. And so the fact that industry is now on board with that and gets it is a huge, huge positive change. And when I went to school here and before, like, my fantasy was working for the government. You know, I wanted to work for the EPA and write tickets, save the world. But now I'm really excited about working with the industry because they have money, they're interested in doing the right thing, and it's the best combination of the two. So I really encourage people to look for careers in industry. There's more and more industry is hiring sustainability directors and all different. So at one time they were the evil, and now they're not. Now they're the weekend. So that's a positive, I think, change. And I think the fact that there's been so many failures, as painful as they may have been, and that ICAT is now opening up. I'm sorry, ICAT is the tuna fishery in the North Atlantic, the International Conservation of Atlantic Tunas. The fact that they are opening up their treaty and renegotiating and stuff like that, people are catching on, and they're willing to do the right thing, and those failures have brought them to a better place.